How's it going, folks? Brian Cusco here, coming live and direct from the happiest place in California. That's right, Triple B. Today's guest is Mr. Quetzal Dwyer, and Quetzal, I hope I said that right, he chased his dreams and created a whole facility down in Costa Rica where he keeps all kinds of really cool reptiles. I know this is a long video, but it's well worth it. He's got lots of good pictures, lots of good information, successfully breeding bullens, pythons, just to name one single thing. There's a ton of information in this video, lots of awesome species to check out. Quetzal's really awesome. I've always had a love for people from New York for whatever reason. I just got real good experiences with them, and I think they're cool as hell. I wish I could be as cool as somebody from New York, but unfortunately I'm just some dude from California. You're watching Triple B TV.
Contrary to what a lot of people believe, there are plenty of green areas in some of the outer boroughs, especially the Bronx, where there's reasonable herping to be done. I know the Bronx has a horrible reputation worldwide. I mean, a couple of years ago, I was in Bogota, Colombia, and there was a neighborhood in Bogota, of all places, that was so bad they called it El Bronx. Come on, what's that? But anyway, I used to, at this age, when I first got to meet Philippe, I was a fixture in all of the local exotic animal reptile stores, making a complete pain in the ass of myself, acting like it was all these places were my own personal public libraries. I never spent any money. I acted like the staff had nothing better to do than answer my 1,000,001 questions. But whatever, moved on. So, there was one of the stores, Philippe, I'd like to say, his store was a very special one that was to have a lasting influence on me and my career path. That was the first place where I'd ever seen reptiles kept anywhere other than a fish tank. He had beautiful planted enclosures and mixed species exhibits, and the amount of love that went into his setups was really clear. And believe it or not, 40 years later, Philippe is still one of my heroes. Pretty impressive, huh? You maintained your status. Many others haven't. So anyway, let's not go there. So anyway, I did my best when I was living in New York to build nice setups for my places. I'd build for my terrariums. I did waterfalls and planted them up, but you can only get so far if you're living in an apartment. But I got a pretty unique opportunity in my early 20s this is a horrible shot because when you live in the tropics, all of your photos turn to mush. And there was a window between the digital age and, just slides, so bear with me. This is a picture of a facility in the Canary Islands that was founded by Bert Langerwerf and a couple of his partners. And this is the first time I ever got to see reptiles kept outdoors. And they really, really shined. It's a completely different world, keeping stuff outdoors. And I just looked at what those guys were doing over there, and I was like, keeping my stuff outdoors, making a living, having people pay to come and look at my collection, that's what I want to do with the rest of my life. Boom. So slowly but surely, I started to build a facility in Costa Rica. I went down there at a pretty young age. I was 26 when I went there with my life savings, all of $22,000, which I went through pretty fast. But that turned out to be a blessing in disguise because it took a really long time to build, and it's very important when you're setting something up in the tropics to pay a lot of attention to where the rain falls and where the sun hits on every month of the year. There's problems that, for example, one of the enclosures, back there, the start of one of the enclosures back there, a couple of months a year, a spring would appear in the middle of the enclosure. I wasn't something I planned on, and if I didn't do my drainage correctly, the bottom could have gotten washed out and stuff could have escaped, and that ended up being a cage for big monitors, which would have caused a lot of trouble for me. So, long time working. Oh, this is the wrong order. I'm sorry. This is a picture of the Canarian facility. Great photo, exactly. But yeah, this is some of construction in CR, which took a long time, a lot of money, regardless of the fact that I typically put my girlfriends to work. They're doing easy jobs like planting coconuts during that period. But all's well that ends well. Humidity is a big, big problem there. I mean, it typically rains 9 months a year, and we get 3 dry months. Almost everything that we work with, whether it be a colubrid or a lizard or anything, needs to be maintained and set up like it's a chameleon or an emerald boa. You know, everything needs a lot of ventilation because you get so much humidity, and airflow is huge. Most of our units have these, you can see up there, they're sliding roofs, which you can let a varying amount of sun and a varying amount of rain in. Larger lizards and turtles and tortoises we keep in outdoor open cages like this. Snakes and smaller lizards, it's another of the outdoor enclosures. The snakes and the smaller lizards we keep in like a central gallery, which is open on the sides but has a roof. It has, you can see the slide roofs there. An unexpected benefit to the slide roof, which, you know, I'm not gonna lie, completely happened by accident. I can take no credit for this. But during the dry season, it'll collect the dew at, you know, early in the wee hours of the morning. And so the plants in the cages can get water and the animals can get a drink. We did a little informal experiment with some of the snake species that are generally thought as being more sedentary species, like eyelash vipers and emerald boas, to see if they would position themselves accordingly to where the dew falls. Because, you know, we have a range, these can be moved about a meter up and down, and they did. They would position themselves in the dry season to places where the dew would hit. It'd be pretty, I'm sure that happens in the wild as well, but to my knowledge, that hasn't been informally studied. It'd be pretty easy to do, just set up a camera, find out where a snake is hanging out, set up a camera and see if it's positioned in a place where they get dew. Now, it's often I get talk to people, and not often, but from time to time, people will say, "Oh, you know, honestly, you know, what you do doesn't really count. You know, it's, you know, with the climate, you know, everything, the animals just do it themselves, and there's, you know, zero maintenance." Okay, in some cases that's true. There's some animals, such as this black phase Varanus salvador, that the maintenance is limited to throwing in food and digging up eggs. That applies to some exotic species and some native species as well. This is a baby hatching out. This is, I learned with this particular baby, when this hatched out, these hadn't been bred before. So I'm going to, a hard lesson that I learned there, I didn't know what the babies were going to look like. I didn't know if they were going to be spotted or have black heads or black tails. And when they finally hatched, monitors take a long time to hatch, as everyone knows, as is. But I saw a little black head sticking out. Oh, cool. Then, you know, next day, a little black foot sticking out. Oh, cool. Then next day, a little black tail sticking out. I'm like, oh, come on, what's this gonna look like? And I couldn't wait anymore, and I opened up the egg, and it was solid black. I was, oh, this is so beautiful, oh my God, oh. And I flipped it over, and it had an umbilical hemorrhage. I mean, the lizard survived, but it was, you know, I almost had a heart attack. I was like, what have I done? I'm gonna be more patient next time. I'm not gonna take this into my hand. I gotta grow up. Yeah, this is another species. This is another example of a species that, you know, it's a local species, Basiliscus plumifrons, that the maintenance is basically throwing in food and digging up eggs. You know, all of the outdoor cages that I showed you before, those have a running water system. And they've got fish in them and, you know, invertebrates and plants. And they're fed out of a stream. Some of the other species that we work with that we get as wild adults, like matamatas and emerald boas, when we get them as wild adults, typically the magic number seems to be about 3 years for them to start reproducing and, you know, fall in with the Costa Rican rhythm and going at it. This is same with African species as well. These are some Congo softshells, Cycloderma aubreyi. We're just hitting the 3-year mark with those. This is a little foreplay. We haven't gotten eggs yet, but it's looking good. So hope I didn't jinx myself by talking about it publicly. Anyway, this is Rhamnocheles madagascariensis. This is another species that took full 3 years to get settled in, but Now eggs every year, all the eggs hatch. Okay, one of the problems, we do have problems. It's not all roses. One of the problems we run into is, okay, you see here, this is the backdrop for my place. This is dripping rainforest. Even though we have a 2-meter wall around the facility, some interactions with wild species are inevitable. Sometimes those are interesting, sometimes those are disastrous. This is a Xenosaurus sanmartinensis from Mexico. Generally, I like to keep my stuff slim and trim, and these guys were looking a little fat for my liking, so I put them on a diet, and they still looked like little butterballs. I was wondering what was going on until one day I saw one eating a slug, which, to my knowledge, they haven't been reported to eat. But I mean, that was unavoidable and didn't seem to be any risk, so just left it alone. This here is one of my favorite lizards. This is Crocodilurus amazonicus. This is eating a frog that fell into its cage. I'm going to talk more about these guys in a little while. These guys will eat anything that falls into their cage. They'll ambush dragonflies. They'll sit in the plant and jump up like miniature Cuban crocs and catch dragonflies out of the air, which is awesome. They'll eat frog eggs. Frogs will come into the cages and lay eggs, the ones that don't get eaten like this one. They'll eat amoebas that fall into the cage. Great, great lizards. Okay, this is one of, now I'm getting into the, fading into the interactions with wild animals that are not so fun and interesting. Okay, this is my American croc, which, as you can see, a porcupine got into its cage and she ate it. And we were a little worried about the results of this, but it turned out to be no issue. I mean, she actually ate the head and the tail of the porcupine and gave us a hard time when we tried to get it out. She was completely unfazed by the spines. The spines were gone in a couple of days. It would have been interesting to see if she would have waited till the porcupine decomposed a little bit before she ate it. But I mean, this is open to the public. You can't have a rotting porcupine bobbing in one of the cages. Knowing my luck, that'd be like when PETA would come in or something like that. All right, this beautiful pair of Varanus macraei are not any longer with us because of the fact that some little super toxic scorpion got into its cage and stung them both. That was a disastrous day. And it's, you guys think macraei is a beautiful lizard when you see one here. Keeping a macraei outside under natural light with 100% humidity, that's a beautiful lizard. So that was a pretty painful day. Okay, this is a wood rail, gray-necked wood rail. These get into the cages from time to time and eat some turtle eggs. Typically, they don't dig turtle eggs up, but they will. The Rhinoclemus species will lay their eggs on the surface, and if we don't get them first, they'll get them. Something else that I was worried about in the beginning is that in my area, there's a really high clay content to the soil, and I was worried about that suffocating certain eggs. But that turned out not to be a problem. I was also worried in the beginning about ants being a problem, and including army ants. Army ants sweep through the facility from time to time and typically do not bother any of the animals. I mean, they will stress some of the stuff out, and the stuff will start panicking, but they won't generally attack it. And over the years, we've lost a couple of baby vipers to other types of ants, but I mean, it hasn't been a chronic problem. There's some people I know in other parts of Costa Rica have had big problems with ants. Typically, it's been when the snake has been shedding, because everyone knows that ants love eating shed skin. But for whatever reason, that has not been a problem for us. I'd like to say, and knock on wood here, that also mites are never a problem for us in the outdoor section. We had them a few times in the indoor section, but outdoors mites, we have never had a problem with them. Our biggest problem is skin fungus with snakes. I don't want to look at this picture too long, it's a little depressing, so I'm going to go on. But typically colubrid snakes are the first ones to get skin fungus, and then after that are vipers, and the boas and pythons are typically the last ones to have problems with that. There's one notable exception, but I'll get into that in a little while. But given the nature of the terrariums, the style and size of the terrariums, a lot of times we'll miss eggs. This is a list of species who have laid eggs and they've hatched completely on their own in different terrariums. I know the Bushmaster thing's a little embarrassing, how can you miss Bushmaster eggs? But there was only 2 of them, and it was in a cave. I wasn't crying when I saw baby Bushmasters crawling around the enclosure, I'll put it like that. But some of the species on this list, like the Pelusio, we don't even bother looking for eggs anymore. They hide the nests so well. These we have in a mixed species exhibit with the Cycloderma aubreyi in the water part, and on the land part with Aldabra tortoises. Now, like a jerk, I waited too long before I took this photo. This corner of the cage is just like usually their mud wallow, or it's still muddy, but it's often filled with like an inch or so of water. And invariably, the little Pelusio, they make their way to the shallow water, as opposed to going into the deep water where they might easily be gobbled by the soft shells. My thoughts on that is that small turtles are programmed to seek out shallow water where there's more shelter, as opposed to head for deep water, main channel, where they're more likely to end up as fish food. Whether that would work out across the board, I doubt it. But in the case of this species, it's been a success story. It's a little Pelusio there. I'm going to talk about Bushmasters a little bit. Bushmasters, the other species, the Melanocephala, live right outside their habitat is right outside the grounds of the park. That's not to say that they don't need a little more special attention. Bushmasters are very prone to a skin fungus on their bellies from being too humid. This is a snake that it's very important to understand to pay attention to the microhabitat as opposed to the habitat. Bushmasters live in dry holes in the wild, and the way to look for this species, Lachesis stenophrys, is to look for holes on a slight embankment that are headed up. They can't be headed down, they have to be headed up. Invariably, when you cut a stick, about 2 meters long, and you poke that into the holes, and if there's a snake inside, you're gonna know. But so it's like, this is a jungle snake that has a dry habitat. It's like the opposite of let's say a banded gecko, a desert lizard that has a moist habitat. This is a pair of stenophrys that are mating. This is in the private area. This isn't the display. We've noticed that it's very important to keep terrestrial pit vipers on substrate. When people keep them on newspaper, I've seen their bodies sag. I've seen it in gaboon vipers and jumping vipers, and there's been no long-term studies about internal damage from that, but it can't be good. So, for lack of a better word, a lot of the if not all of the heavy-bodied terrestrial vipers will make like a nest for themselves, which supports the body. Also, with Bushmasters, we like to keep them on, it seems to be beneficial to keep them on peat moss and leaves, which is acidic, which seems to help avoid the skin fungus that they're prone to. This is stenophrys with a clutch of eggs. Some stenophrys eggs hatching here. Bushmaster eggs are pretty easy to hatch, like and they can tolerate anything from like 77 degrees to 87 degrees. We like to incubate them low. We like to incubate everything at a lower temperature, so they'll take longer to hatch, but they'll grow more slowly, and cook at a low temperature, they'll come out a little stronger and healthier, in my opinion. Okay, this is the other species of Bushmaster we work with. This is Lachesis melanocephala. This has got a very limited range and is in big trouble in the wild. This Bushmasters, I like to say, are very clean snakes. After they defecate, they're going to move to the furthest point away from that in the cage. And that's, Bushmasters have had historically a reputation as being aggressive snakes, which anyone who works with them is not true. But when you have one that's been obligated to sit in its own waste, it's going to turn into an aggressive snake. I made the mistake one time of sending some babies up to the States without starving them for a week. And when they were unpacked, the guy's like, "Oh, those are the nastiest baby Bushmasters I've ever seen in my life." But they had all defecated in their little shipping boxes, which kind of led me to believe that some of the records or observations from 100 years ago by people like Raymond Ditmars about Bushmasters being aggressive snakes were probably based on Bushmasters that had been shipped up from Trinidad to New York. It took about a month to get there by steamship, and we're not happy about having to sit around their own waste for a month or whatever. These are some melanocephala going at it. Bushmaster, excuse me. Bushmasters are typically known or thought to be snakes that have really aggressive breeding behavior. That can be true. I've seen them do all types of stuff. I've seen the males bite the females and slam the females with the back of their heads and flip on their backs and try to break the coil. But when the female's receptive, that's not a problem. That can happen, but that's definitely not the rule. But I mean, you definitely don't want to be an unreceptive female Bushmaster. It doesn't look like much fun. This is a baby melanocephala. Interestingly, these guys have brightly colored tails. I mean, as far as I know, they've never been documented to eat lizards in the wild or anything. But next clutch that we have, we're going to do a test with some amoebas or something like that to see if they caught a lure. Right. Probably my favorite part of working with reptiles is observing their behavior and interesting parts of their reproductive biology. What you're looking at right here is an undescribed type of contil from the Grijalva Valley in Mexico and Guatemala, where the black-beaded lizards come from. This is guarding its babies. She did this for 9 days, which to my knowledge has never been reported in this species. After 9 days, the baby shed, and then she stopped. They moved on, and that was it. I mean, my opinion on why that behavior occurs is because the babies after birth are going to have the smell of the birth on them, and they're going to be more vulnerable. I mean, obviously, they're not going to get any bigger in 9 days. So, rat's been documented in rattlesnakes, but not to my knowledge in Echistrodon ever before. Okay, speaking of interesting behavior, some of it has a significance, some of it probably does not. This Caiman lizard right here is chewing on a rock. Anyone who's ever been in the Iquitos area, where these are from, or where these individuals are from, knows that there's no rocks for quite a ways. So it's probably not filing its teeth or anything, but I don't know, I saw it and thought it was interesting and took a picture of it. The same lizard chewing on a rock. Something else interesting that we've seen Caiman lizards do is Caiman lizards are well known in the wild to lay their eggs in termite mounds. But interestingly, any time of the year, if you put a termite mound in with a female Caiman lizard, she'll go over and check it out, poke around, smell it, and dig at it. And she's got to be thinking ahead. It's the only thing that makes any sense. Okay, we've done really well with Caiman lizards. They breed every year. All of the eggs hatch. We use these little contraptions invented by a friend of mine, John Adragna in New York. I'd like to say that in the beginning, when we got our breeders, there was at a time when before Caiman lizards were commonly maintained in captivity, and I almost didn't do it. Years and years ago, I had a chance to look after somebody's Caiman lizards in New York. They came in looking like skeletons, and I really, really babied the crap out of them. I was getting them snails, chopping up pieces of squid, and I had them looking good, but they all ended up dying from impaction, so I was reluctant to get into Caiman lizards again. But my ex-wife was like, "Oh, boys, they're so cute, they're so cute." She was very convincing. I mean, I'm not going into detail, but anyway, we ended up with a couple pairs of Caiman lizards and have had no problems at all since then. My theory on that is that we don't feed them snails either. We have no access to apple snails or anything like that. We feed cat food and trout and have zero problems. They breed every year, all the eggs hatch. We're up to F3 with the Caiman lizards. So my opinion on Caiman lizard husbandry is you can feed them whatever you want as long as they're getting a lot of exercise and they're getting a lot of sunlight. And Caiman lizards like it bright. Okay, this is a species, Crocodilurus amazonicus, that the Caiman lizards are often sympatric with in South America. This is primarily a Brazilian lizard, which accounts for it being so rare in captivity. I mean, they make it into the periphery of several other countries, but they've never been shipped out into the States in any numbers. And I think my opinion on that is because often, surprisingly, animal collectors in other countries are surprisingly narrow-minded and have tunnel vision. They'll only go for the species, Indonesia being a notable exception. They'll only go for species that they know that they can make money with. And regardless if it's something as cool as this, they'll ignore it. Especially if it's something that you need to go 4 days on a boat to go find. These have done well for us. They started, they mated almost right away, but they would always dump the eggs for the first couple of years that we had them. And I tried experimenting, giving them termite mounds to lay their eggs in. They weren't interested. I tried giving them sand. I tried giving them mud, rotting vegetation, so on and so forth. I almost got to a point when I was like, what do I do now? I've pretty much exhausted my bag of tricks. But one time, we had tilapia in the cage with them. And I thought I was being clever, as often the case when I think I'm being clever, that turns out not to be the truth. But we had tilapia in the cage with them to clean, eat the uneaten waste and so on and so forth. And for a reason that I don't even remember, we pulled out the tilapia and that completely changed their behavior. We had 1.3 in this cage, and as soon as the tilapia were gone, the females would set up territories which were about 2 meters of land and 2 meters of water and 1 meter of land. And when one female would pass the other one's territory, she'd do it underwater, invariably. This is 2 females fighting, which I thought this was very interesting. These specimens are from the upper Amazon, where there's flood forests, where I'm sure everyone's seen pictures on TV of dolphins swimming in the treetops. So there's no doubt that they have very specialized nesting habitat, nesting requirements in that habitat. Their distribution in the flood forest is also very, very spotty, which would support that. I have some buddies in Brazil who work with specimens from the lower Amazon, which is not, as drastic a habitat change, and they haven't had. It's been a lot easier for them than it has for me. Finally, have been getting some success. Hatched out a few babies. I'm still not proud of the amount that we're doing with them, but still haven't quite cracked that nut. But some's better than others. Okay, this is Diploglossus monotropus. This is a lizard from Caribbean side of Costa Rica that also has a very interesting breeding biology. We would get, when we first got these, we'd get a little mating, and the eggs typically weren't good when we got them, and breeding wasn't what it should be. But then I learned from a friend of mine named Nicole Atterbury, who was working at the Nashville Zoo. What she was doing was she was injecting the females with liquid calcium during the breeding season to stimulate ovulation and to get good eggs. We did a little bit of homework and figured the time of year that we would get gravid females coincided with the latter part of the land crab migration. So the land crabs, they come out of the jungle and they lay their eggs in the sea a couple of months, and then sometime later the baby crabs that are born in the ocean, they make their way back into the forest. So the reproductive biology seems to be based on that, which is cause for some concern, because literally the land crab populations in Costa Rica in the time that I've been there have declined by like 99%. I don't know whether it's a combination of the dirty ocean or of them getting slaughtered on the coast roads. But this should be that should be taken into consideration if 20 years from now people stop seeing gallowasps. This is an ovulating female. This is one of our setups for these. These guys, they do take care of the eggs, that's 100% sure. And there's some evidence that they will take care of the babies as well. I know somebody who's dug up a female with some babies that were twice the size of hatchlings. But the problem with observing that is literally, if the female's got eggs or babies with her and you look at her funny, she will eat them. Literally, if you look at her funny. I keep meaning to set up one of these years, I'm going to set up a camera in their nest and see what's going on there, because that's the only way to really watch them do it. There's a baby coming out here. All right, it's talking about interesting behavior. This is Varanus spinulosus from the Solomon Islands. This is one of very few lizard species that have the front claws are longer than their rear claws. We were curious as to why. It's like a reptilian version of an eye. They dig like the Prasinus. They'll go into holes and pull it up. They also love shredding wood we'll take like balsa trees that are rotting and put them in the cage and let them shred those up to pull the cockroaches out. Very interesting species. This is another one. I hadn't planned on talking about this, but that seems to have benefited from the cane toads. I went over to Solomon Islands many years ago. This is before these were common in captivity, when they were only known from a couple of pickled ones and a couple that had come into the trade in the 90s. And after a couple thousands and thousands of dollars and a whole bunch of boats and a whole bunch of planes, they got to the island where they're from, Isabel, and it was completely overrun by cane toads. And I was like, oh man, don't tell me they're all gone. But it turns out that these do not eat the cane toads. In a rather bold experiment at my place, I tried to feed them cane toads to see if they were immune to the poison or if they wouldn't eat them, and they just were not interested. But these guys seem to, Indicus on Isabel have gotten a lot more rare from eating the cane toads than these guys. These are now the dominant species on Isabel Island. These guys also seem to benefit from cleared habitat. They like it hot. It's a species that's active in the middle of the day, unlike Indicus. We hatched, when we first got these, we bred them. We haven't been able to breed them since. There's something we're missing. Do you have anyone themselves know of anyone who's repeatedly bred this species? I'd like to know. Some other interesting breeding biology that we've been able to observe. This is Oxybellus fulgidus. The males are very rough with the females. They bite them on the head and chew on their heads before breeding. We've lost a couple of females. It's not pretty, but it's part of the breeding biology. One of the things we learned about the eggs on these was that, like many arboreal species of snake, the last thing you want to do is bury the eggs. They should be in open air. The ones in this cluster were on the surface survived. The ones that were buried died. This is sister species, Oxybellus wilsoni from Roatan Island. These do not seem to be as rough with the females with breeding, which is interesting. Even though when you look at it, you just think it's a yellow fulgidus, nothing more. Something else that we've seen do something very interesting with is this. This is Rhinoclemis annulata from the Caribbean coast of Costa Rica. This is a very confused turtle. These guys, they'll bury their turds, but they'll lay their eggs on the surface. Don't even ask, because I don't know. There's got to be something to it. These are, annulatus going at it as well. The males are real charming. They drool all over the females. Okay, excuse the quality of this picture. This is something else that we've seen. This is a species of turtle that's very rarely maintained in captivity and even more rarely given a chance to bask. Peltocephalus dumerlina. These guys bask with their mouths open like crocodiles, which I think is very interesting. Don't ask me why. Reptiles doing interesting behavioral observations are not limited to rare species. This is Heloderma exasperatum, very commonly maintained in captivity. It's probably bred into like F15, something like that by now. We have a pair of these that's open, that are in an enclosure open to the public. The red part of this cage is all backfilled. It's about 1 meter high. I asked my guys to pour a cement slab leaving about 1 foot of dirt so they could nest. But I guess, one of them was mad at me or whatever, thinking about their girlfriend, and they did a half-assed job doing the cement, and the lizards were able to get through it. And that's about 3 square meters that I would have had to excavate to find the eggs. As luck would have it, that happened on the Friday of a long weekend. And excavating that much that's not a job that's going to take 20 minutes, so I had to wait several days before I did it. But the interesting part about that was that the female, watching her cover up the nest, first of all, she laid the egg about at a certain point in that cage, there was about 5 feet from where she actually put it in the nest, which I thought was interesting. I mean, lizards are well known to move eggs around in the nest, but this seemed a little extreme. But the most interesting part of this was that after the female had nested, she took dirt from every different corner of the cage, from every different level, And then she would climb up the screen and test the air. Decide she wasn't satisfied with her work, she'd move some more dirt around from this corner, from that corner, from that depth. And then she would check out the smell from every different angle of the cage that she could get to, which I thought was fascinating. You know, we know very little about the nesting of reptiles in the wild, and I'd like to say that as herpetoculturists, you know, this is an area we're in a very advantageous position to report on, because that's something, you know, you can't learn from museum specimens, and it's pretty hard to learn about in the wild unless you're dealing with species that have stereotyped nesting habits like sea turtles or Podocnemis or something like that. Speaking of Podocnemis, this is Podocnemis sextuberculata. This is a species that's generally thought of as being fully aquatic. There are no reports of them basking. However, we saw this female for this last dry season. She's doing what I refer to as cryptic basking. She would be, you know, under plants, and she'd spend every day like this. In the beginning, I thought it was a stress thing, but then a couple of nights ago, a week, she would go into the water and she would eat. I'd see her face to face with the male. And so it definitely wasn't a stress thing. We haven't got eggs yet, but I think pretty sure she was thermoregulating, but not in a you know, a stereotypical way. It's another animal that we work with. It's a fascinating, beautiful snake, Rhinobothrium bovali. There's another reptile that cryptically basks below bark. These guys, I found them in the wild, you know, in like shacks, you know, under zinc roofing when it easily had to be 100 degrees heating up, but not exposed to the sun. This is a big snake. These get about 5 or 6 feet. It's like a tricolored boiga. Beautiful, interesting, difficult. They have 0 fat bodies on them. You know, one could be starving to death and it'll look just like this, and the only place they'll lose any tone is in the tail. They need to eat about every 3 days, in my opinion. And if you miss a meal, or miss a couple of meals, they'll eat again, but then they'll get like a block in the cloaca, and they won't be able to pass waste. I mean, we've tried, you know, a lot of techniques to get around that, giving them enemas and trying to manually work it out, and never seems to do it. So it's a very, very unforgiving species. It's a lizard eater in the wild, but in captivity, about 1 out of every 5 will eat mice. One thing that's easy about them is they're easy to breed. You put 2 of them together, they're gonna mate and have eggs, which is nice. This is a baby. All right, typically, the idea of my place was to work with tropical species it's appropriate to work with the climate and to work with nature as opposed to against it. But it'd be a shame with all these beautiful highland species in Central America to have that I have easy access to not work with them. So I built what I optimistically referred to as a cold room for my Bothriechis species. In hindsight, you know, cold closet is probably more appropriate term. This has a misting system, and we had lights on the top that we would turn on from 2 to 4 hours a day, depending on the season. Because, you know, reptiles from highlands, you know, light and heat is at a premium, and a lot of them are programmed to seek it out as much as they can, and we didn't want to overdo it. This is Bothriechis superciliaris. This is from Costa Rica and Panama. It's a highland version of eyelash viper, more or less. They have larger babies than the eyelash vipers do, and smaller clutches. It's another superciliaris. This is a clutch of superciliaris. As with all of the highland Bothriechis, we typically pull them out of the cold room to raise them. They seem to do better like that. As a rule with baby Bothriechis, we won't even try to feed them for a month. We'll wait till they get really hungry, and then try them on pinkies. Those that don't eat pinkies will eat lizards. Those that don't eat lizards get assist fed. And almost always after that, like once their bodies start moving, they won't be a problem. You know, my experience with the baby vipers is that they just need a little jolt to get their bodies working, and then it's on. This is Bothriechis nigroviridis, same deal. There's some babies here. Bothrioechis lateralis, another Costa Rican Highland species that we've been pretty successful with. Bothrioechis marchi from Honduras. We bred those as well in this, in the cold room. There's another marchi. Bothrioechis aurifer from Guatemala. Some of the lessons that we've learned with the cold room, we had some problems with the design of the basking sites. This is especially true with these, that the basking sites need to be designed in a certain way that the female can uniformly heat up her body. Because if not, the babies are going to develop at different times, and there'll be like a couple of slugs, not slugs, but babies at different levels of development. But once we switched around the design of the basking perches, that problem disappeared. There's some more aurifer. This is bicolor from Guatemala. Another bicolor. Now we were very successful with the Highland stuff, so I got a little tempted to try my hand with the holy grail of Highland snakes. This is Simalia bolani, which very specialized, beautiful snake. The way we set these up was similar logic to how we did with the Bothrioechis. There was an outdoor portion of the cage and an indoor. The outdoor, we made sure it was sterile. So like sterile meaning like it's just with tile and branches. The idea was so that the snakes wouldn't have any shelter out there, so they could go out if they wanted to warm up, and they would go back to their holes when they were resting. It seemed to work out. Snakes would come out for a couple hours a day and heat up, and then they'd go back inside. Interestingly, I'd like to say, after feeding, invariably these guys would go back inside to the cool temperature and air conditioning to eat, which is unusual for snakes. Most reptiles will heat up to digest their food. What we did to try to simulate the cycle was we doubled up the food on the female for a couple of months a year, and we injected the food with calcium, with her food with liquid calcium, which proved to be a mistake. The next year we killed her by doing that, so I wouldn't recommend anyone doing that for any pythons. Now this is it's kind of a lousy picture, but this is the indoor section of the bolani cage. This, we made it cold. We try to make it as cozy as possible, as potting soil. We left some urates in there and pieces of shed skin, because that's been shown by some studies by David Chisar and some other people. That it's calming. It's a familiar smells have a calming effect on snakes. So, it was a pretty good day when I got some eggs. Interestingly, the story behind this picture is that the outdoor portion of the cage got hit with sunlight for about a couple hours in the morning, and it took her longer than that to lay the eggs. So the sun had already passed by the time she had laid the eggs, and she was frantically trying to get into the sun. So I opened up the cage. I mean, honestly, I wasn't thinking, science or anything like that. I wanted a goofy picture like this of myself with the female and the eggs. So I let her crawl out, and it took her all of 2 minutes to get warm enough to come back to the eggs. These guys are very, very efficient warmers. Here we got 17 eggs and 17 babies. Okay, one egg went bad, but another egg we got twins from. So I mean, maybe that wasn't 100% success, but I kind of doubt I cried myself to sleep that night. Okay. Unfortunately, we had some problems with the baby bolins. I mean, like I said before, there was one notable exception about boas and pythons getting skin infections. These guys were very susceptible to this, and we lost a couple of them. I talked to some buddies in Australia who work with diamond pythons, which is another cold adapted python, and I asked if diamond pythons were more susceptible to skin infections than other pythons, and they said yes. So I guess that's the trade-off from for being such an efficient warmer. Okay. Needless to say, after that breeding success, I had some money, so I decided to upgrade. And pull everything out of the closet and build a building outside that was mirrored inside and out. This has got an outdoor section and an indoor section and a tube going through. This is what the indoor part of it looks like. And the top is all for Bothriochus and the bottom is for Bolini. There's some Bothriochus superciliaris in there. We were a little concerned that the Bothriochus might not be able to learn how to use the system with the tubes going in and out, because that's not really, they don't live in holes, so they might not be programmed for that, but it turned out not to be a problem. The structure has only been, we've only had it for about a year. I've got a couple of babies, I've bred lateralis in it so far. Nothing else, but time will tell. And the Bolini that we kept back, are going to be adults next year, and we're hoping to have some success stories to report in the future regarding this room. That's it. Thank you very much.
If you are still here, then you knew that was worth it. I hope you stuck around for the whole thing. Well, obviously, if you're listening to this part, then yes, you stuck around for the whole thing. Congratulations. I know it was worth it. I told you it was going to be worth it, right? I told you it was going to be worth it. It was worth it. Next week, we're going to be going to the Tinley Park show at the Gecko Symposium with Frank Colachico, God, I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, giving a great talk about geckos and finding them in their natural habitat. Lots of great pictures inspiring people to go out herping around the world. Until then, you've been watching Triple B TV. Y'all take care.